All right. Today we're just going to have a fun discussion. We're going to take a break from our lessons on formal game theory because Lapis 5988 asks, do you believe that a real game will necessarily retain players forever? Well, I wrote up an answer to this, and I'm going to read it and then discuss things further. So, I write back, wow, that's a deep question. And by the way, this is on the, I think, games requiring strategy to win? No, requiring full customization of strategy. So it's on that video, kind of buried somewhere in the comments. Wow, that's a deep question. I honestly don't know, and neither does anyone else, because real games have never been part of human culture before. We don't know what a universal activity of social fun that bridges all boundaries and can build communities regardless of borders or boundaries will be like. There are so many unexplored facets of design we have not talked about yet that really mean I don't have any significant indicators that would suggest to me an answer to your question one way or the other. I guess, too, that you could add some caveats to that which would change the nature of the answer. Those restrictions might find a more elegant answer, but I think it's entirely possible, nothing disproves it that I know of, that a real game could have infinite appeal. As a thought experiment, if you became immortal in your lifetime, then really the only possible candidate for an activity you and other immortals wouldn't get sick of would be a real game. Something that couldn't be solved with all the other stipulations that provided skill-based competition with infinite variety. You would never play the same game twice, and gameplay would never become trivial. I guess then you'd have to find something else about a real game that could not stand up to eternity. So that was my answer. And I have given this some thought. It's funny that this commenter brings it up. And I kind of give my thoughts here because based on formal game theory, this is exactly what you get. But I think this question is asking a few things that reach a lot further than that I really like. And one of the things that I kind of instantly thought of was from D&D lore. I forget which, is it, I don't know if it's Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms. I think it might be Forgotten Realms. So it's the Great Dragon game of Zorvental. And Zorvental is spelled Xorvintal. And AJ Pickett here on YouTube has done a video on it. It's really, really good. And it's this very involved ancient game that older dragons play in the D&D world. And there's a whole bunch of very complex rules, and the whole game is sort of like a power play game, basically. It's their political machinations to control each other's territory and capture hordes. But the rules stipulate they can't directly attack one another. So it's sort of like if you took the idea of a real game, but then presented it to dragons, and they said, okay, sounds cool, but we're dragons. So because of our instincts, we're gonna have to break a few of these rules here. We do need some real world relevance, because otherwise everyone's just gonna cheat or something. And I was kind of thinking about that, and I was like, I don't know, could dragons really play like, a real game? But, I don't, that just kind of got into other like speculation about the psychology of the dragons. Could they set aside their greed long enough to, consider that a tournament could be played for stakes without the tournament having to cost something? Sort of like asking a dwarf not to appraise a jewel so that they can win a jewel to appraise. I don't know if that's getting a little too rabbit hole-ish into the D&D lore, but I thought it was really cool because the way that they describe Zorvental is very real game like, but there's one sort of tweak you'd have to make to it, is that as presented, it obviously breaks real world relevance. The dragons have to, I think, give up their powers, and they are playing for keeps. They are playing for actual territory, actual people die, actual hordes are captured, but not in a pay up tournament sort of way. Like, it's not like people are, putting ante into a pot and then winning a prize pool. It's dragons actually fighting against one another by proxy to either capture each other's hordes or defensively to keep hordes safe from being captured. And the one tweak that you'd really have to make to Zorvental is that it could be a real game if dragons didn't play it on the material plane. And that would actually, I think, probably solve all of your problems. And the reason I am bringing up Zorvental isn't just because it came to mind, but because it illustrates something about this commenter's question that really kind of makes it worth considering in terms of both, just thought experiments, but also actual game theory study. Is that in terms of complexity and advancement, a real game is definitely playable for a person's lifetime without losing novelty. That's definitely the point, or at least one of the points. Definitely one of the points, one of the major points that I've gone over here. But the other one is that, or not the other point, but the other thing to consider here is that past a certain point of advancement, especially in intelligence, like the intelligence of, an elder dragon, things become trivial even when they're not meant to be. Like, if you went back in time with modern weaponry, a lot of wars and battles would become trivial. And it's not because those battles are trivial, it's because you've made an imbalance in the weaponry. And that's the problem you could possibly, theoretically, run into if we became super intelligent. But at the same time, if we were to do that, like if we hit the technological singularity in our lifetimes or something, and, we all became, Silver Surfers or T-1000s, I think we would just end up making more complex games. I don't know, maybe complex isn't the right word. More intellectually satisfying games. They would maybe take longer to play. Maybe that would be something too. And I don't know if it would be, turn-based or if it would be more interesting for sort of like more real-time games. I mean, what would be more interesting in the long run? Something like a tabletop game or something like a video game? I don't know. Technically speaking, real games can have infinite variety, and they never become trivial because they're not solvable. Strategies required, you have full customization of strategy, and wherever you're playing is, your local competition meta. And no matter what real game you're playing or where you're playing it, your skill is always what determines your success. So in order to be infinitely playable, no matter what, I don't know if any games we could create now would be still playable at that, further sci-fi futuristic, versions of ourselves. I don't know if we would still be playing the same games. It's possible. Maybe we would play different versions of them. Maybe we would adapt them to be, like I said, more intellectually satisfying, more challenging, or more, this or that, whatever. Or we may just, develop entirely new games. But either way, we will be using formal game theory to make real games, or we will not be making games. And here's another topic that I wanted to bring up. And this is kind of one of those things, it's like one of those topics that, like I was saying in my reply, that we haven't talked about yet because it's just so far out there. It's so far down the road. There's so many things that are on my list of things to make videos about, but I just want to, cover the basics first. But here's one of them, is that real game design doesn't just affect the actual mechanics that you're designing, but it also changes, like, Well, it changes everything. Like, it might even change the hardware of video game consoles that you're designing. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to. You could still design a real game for the Super Nintendo. That's possible. But when you know what a real game is going to do, and you can facilitate more of those things, now that you know something different about game design, you might go about designing a console differently. You might go about designing arcade units differently. You might go about designing handhelds very differently. And I think this definitely informs a lot of the playability, the replayability, the community around real games that, theoretically down the road we could have. And when you have those opportunities and you have something that fundamentally can never get old, there's always a reason to keep playing it. It's not just like real games, and actually we'll have to cut this particular discussion off because it's a separate video. This is for the video. I'm going to get to this, I think, at the end of this tutorial of videos here, is the topic of why, kind of bringing all this together. Like, what does a real game give society? Like, all of these things together makes it so the skill of players determines victory exclusively. Nothing else but that. But what does that mean? What does that play out to? What opportunities does that create? And a lot of those things you can invent, like in new console design. The way that you, as a game company, if you are Nintendo or Sega is owned by somebody now, right? They somehow exist. If Sega ever was able to separate themselves enough to have their own, product line again, they might go about designing like a new handheld console to go with a new home game console. And those things might be related to arcade units. These things could all be interconnected. They could have transferability. You wouldn't just be restricted to one style of gameplay or one environment of gameplay. And these things are all much more possible, much more feasible, much more profitable, and have I mentioned way easier to do in a real game with real game designs. And for those wondering, yes, I have thought of some of these designs, but no, thinking about it here, I just can't go over them because, those things should actually exist. Someday I would like to make them, and I can't really give out ideas that specific. I can try to give as many examples of things in discussions as I can, but some higher order ideas like how to actually design a game console are things that I'm gonna keep a little closer to the chest. I'm not necessarily gatekeeping with that. That's not preventing anybody from understanding game theory. It's just being prudent with patents. But yeah, there you go. My now very buried lead being that you could very much intentionally design a lot of things to facilitate eternal gameplay and reasons to come back to games, independent of the fact that a real game is just inherently enjoyable and rewarding. And we'll be covering more of that when we get to the Why We Game video. I think that's where I will end the discussion. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. We're going to continue on next time in the lessons, I think, with lacking real-world relevance. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to also include solvability in that. I may have to break up those last few bullet points because a lot of the topics, overlap. A lot of them are interrelated. It's sort of hard to break things apart and talk about them separately because everything is interconnected. It's all, one solid theorem. You can't pick and choose which parts you want. But in terms of explaining it, you have to break things up. So yeah, I think next time we're going to be talking The main topic is going to be lacking real-world relevance. A real game needs to lack real-world relevance. And we might also be talking quite a bit about a game not being solvable. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I don't know if you learned anything. Maybe you did. I hope you did. Let me know if you did. But either way, thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one.